The first letter arrived on a Tuesday, an official-looking envelope with Pinecrest Homeowners Association, emblazoned across the top in bold serif font. I almost threw it away. My 200-acre ranch had never been part of any homeowners association. My land predated the development by nearly 40 years. I tore open the envelope out of curiosity more than concern, unfolding a violation notice printed on expensive cream stationery. Notice of violation. It read in alarming red letters. Property owner must remove all non-conforming livestock fencing, agricultural outbuildings, and commercial farming equipment within 30 days of receipt of this notice. Failure to comply will result in fines of $100 per day and potential legal action. I read it twice, certain there had been a mistake. My property was zoned agricultural. The fence had stood for 20 years. The barn housed rescue horses that my niece helped rehabilitate. None of this was subject to HOA regulations because my land was explicitly excluded from their jurisdiction in the original county zoning plans. The following morning, I drove to the county record's office. The clerk, a woman named Martha who had worked there since I was a boy, pulled the original plat maps and zoning documents. She confirmed what I already knew. Your property is outside the Pinecrest HOA boundaries by a good quarter-mile, she said, pointing to the clear demarcation lines. They have no authority over your land whatsoever. Armed with copies of the official documentation, I drafted a formal response to the HOA. I explained the situation politely but firmly, attaching copies of the relevant records. I expected that to be the end of it. I was wrong. 3 days later, a white SUV with Pinecrest HOA magnetically attached to the door pulled into my driveway. A woman emerged, dressed in a blazer despite the heat, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. She marched toward me with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting her way. I am Karen Westfield, head of the Pinecrest Homeowners Association Compliance Committee, she announced, not offering her hand. We received your letter, but there seems to be a misunderstanding about jurisdiction. I invited her to sit on the porch, offering iced tea which she declined with a look of distaste. I explained the situation again, showing her the same documents I had included with my letter. Karen dismissed them with a wave of her manicured hand. Those maps are outdated. The association has expanded its sphere of influence. Your property affects our community aesthetic and property values. We have the right to enforce standards. That is not how property law works, I replied calmly. You cannot simply declare jurisdiction over land that is legally exempt from your authority. Karen's smile tightened. The county inspector will be stopping by soon to evaluate the violations. I suggest you start removing those eyesores before things get complicated. She gestured toward my barn and fencing. We are creating a premium community here. Your rustic setup is undermining everyone's property values. After she left, I called my attorney, an old friend named James who specialized in property disputes. He confirmed my position but warned me to document everything. Some of these HOAs think they are their own governments, he said. Be careful. The next day, my neighbor Sam stopped by. He had moved into the Pinecrest development 2 years earlier and regretted it almost immediately. Watch out for Karen, he warned, leaning against my fence. She has been talking about you at every meeting. Says your ranch is a target property she intends to bring into compliance. She cannot do that legally, I said. Legal might not matter to her. She has been bragging about some connection she has with the county, some new HOA compliance officer she controls. Says he can make life difficult for anybody who does not fall in line. Something cold settled in my stomach. This was not just an administrative error or a power-hungry HOA president. This was starting to feel targeted, personal. That evening, I walked my property line as the sun set, looking at the ranch that had been in my family for generations. My daughter's RV was parked near the eastern fence, where she stayed when visiting from college. The horse barn my father built stood solid and practical. This was not just land. This was heritage. I knew then that something more serious was brewing. Karen did not just want compliance. She wanted conquest, and I needed to be ready. The confrontation I had been anticipating arrived on a Thursday morning. I was repairing a section of fence when a black pickup truck with tinted windows pulled up to my gate. The vehicle had no official markings, no county logo, nothing to indicate any legitimate authority. A man stepped out dressed in what looked like tactical pants and a polo shirt with an embroidered badge on the chest. He wore mirrored sunglasses and carried himself with artificial authority. I watched as he deliberately ignored the no trespassing and private property signs posted clearly on my gate. Without hesitation, he unlatched the gate and walked onto my land as if he owned it. My dogs, usually vocal with strangers, looked to me for guidance. I signaled them to stay calm and approach the intruder. "Can I help you?" I called out, keeping my tone neutral despite the obvious trespass. The man swaggered toward me. "County code enforcement," he said, flashing something that looked like a badge, but too quickly for me to verify its authenticity. "Here to document violations reported on this property." I stood my ground. "I need to see proper identification and documentation of your authority to be on my property." His demeanor changed instantly. The professional facade dropped, revealing something harder, more personal. "I do not need to show you anything," he snapped. "I have jurisdiction over this entire area. Step aside." He brushed past me and began taking photographs of my barn with his phone. He moved with purpose, as if following a checklist. He photographed the horse enclosures, the equipment shed, even my daughter's RV. "That is enough," I said firmly. "You are trespassing on private property. Either show me legitimate identification and a warrant or leave immediately. I will call the sheriff." The man turned to face me, his expression contemptuous. "Go ahead and call. I am the law here now. This entire area falls under my jurisdiction as special compliance officer." He gestured broadly. "All of this is coming down. Those fences, that barn, that eyesore RV. We have standards to maintain." A movement down the road caught my eye. A silver Lexus was parked about 50 yards away. Even from this distance, I could see Karen watching through the windshield, a self-satisfied smile visible on her face. The pieces clicked into place. This was her enforcement officer, not a legitimate county official at all, but someone playing dress-up with just enough props to intimidate residents into compliance. It was a scam, but one with teeth if people believed it. I pulled out my phone and began recording video. "You are on camera now. State your name and show your official identification." His face contorted with anger. "You do not want to make an enemy of me. I can make your life very difficult." "That sounds remarkably like a threat," I replied, continuing to record. "A threat made while trespassing on private property while impersonating a government official, all of which are serious crimes in this state." "You will be hearing from us," he snarled, walking back toward his truck. "Expect citations and fines. That barn comes down one way or another." As he drove away, I noticed Karen's Lexus pull out right after him, following like an escort. The coordinated nature of their actions confirmed my suspicions. This was not random harassment. This was a calculated campaign. I immediately sent the video to my attorney James and to Michael, my friend on the sheriff's department. I included a detailed account of what had happened and requested guidance on next steps. Michael called back within minutes. "That is definitely not one of our deputies or any county code enforcement officer I know," he confirmed. "The badge he flashed is not official. You need to file a formal trespassing complaint. This is impersonation of a government official." James was equally concerned. "This crosses several legal lines," he said. "Trespassing, intimidation, impersonation of an official, document everything. We can file for a restraining order." I stood on my porch long after they had gone, the encounter replaying in my mind. The arrogance, the threats, the assumption that I would simply back down. They had miscalculated severely. This was not just about protecting my property anymore. This was about exposing a scheme that was likely victimizing others who might not have the resources or knowledge to fight back. I looked down at my phone, the video evidence secure. The first counterattack in what I now realized would be a battle for my land had begun. They thought they had the power. They were about to learn otherwise. The morning after the trespassing incident, I drove to the sheriff's department headquarters. Michael had arranged a meeting with Sheriff Callahan, a no-nonsense woman who had served the county for 15 years. I brought copies of all documentation, the original HOA letters, my property deeds, the county zoning maps, and most importantly, the video of yesterday's confrontation. Sheriff Callahan reviewed everything methodically, her expression growing more serious as she watched the video. "This is not one of ours," she confirmed. "No county official would behave this way or make these statements, and that badge he flashed, definitely not legitimate county identification." She turned to Michael. "I want you to run background on this individual, find out who he is and what authority, if any, he actually possesses." Michael nodded. "I already started looking into it. Preliminary search shows no one matching his description employed by county code enforcement or any related departments." The sheriff turned back to me. "This is serious. Impersonating an official to gain access to private property and make threats. We need to address this immediately." We developed a plan. I would file a formal trespassing complaint, and a cease and desist letter would be sent to both the individual and the HOA. Additionally, Michael would coordinate with 2 other deputies to be stationed on my property the next time this impersonator showed up, which everyone agreed was likely, given his aggressive demeanor. "These types rarely back down after the first confrontation," Sheriff Callahan explained. "Their authority being questioned usually triggers escalation. We need to be ready when he returns." Back at my ranch, I implemented additional security measures. I installed motion-activated cameras at strategic points around my property, particularly at the entrance gate and near the barn that seemed to offend them so much. I made sure the no trespassing signs were clearly visible, and added new ones specifically stating that any entry without permission would be considered criminal trespass. Michael and 2 other deputies, Rodriguez and Chen, came by to familiarize themselves with the property layout. We identified optimal positions where they could remain hidden, but have clear views of the main approach and the barn area. "We will park our vehicles out of sight behind the north ridge," Michael explained. "When he arrives, let him come onto the property again. Document everything like before. Once he is clearly trespassing and you have asked him to leave, signal us. We will handle the rest." The trap was set. Now we waited. The following day, my niece Emma came home from school visibly upset. "The guidance counselor called me in today," she said quietly. "Someone filed a report claiming I was living in unsafe conditions here at the ranch. They asked all these questions about the house and the animals. My blood ran cold. Did they say who filed the report? Emma shook her head. No, but they mentioned something about community standards and property conditions. This was a new low, targeting a child to apply pressure. Only one person knew enough about my family situation to make such a specific report. Corinne had escalated beyond property disputes to attacking my family. I called James immediately. He was furious. Using Child Protective Services as a weapon is not just immoral, it is potentially illegal if the report was made in bad faith, he said. We need to document this connection. The guidance counselor, who knew our family well, confirmed that the complaint had come from a community standards officer associated with a local homeowners association. She had found the complaint suspicious given what she knew about Emma's home life and our ranch. That evening, I received notification of 3 formal complaints filed with the HOA about my property. Despite my land not being under their jurisdiction, Corinne was building a paper trail, establishing a pattern of supposed violations. The strategy was becoming clear. Create enough documentation to give their actions a veneer of legitimacy, then use intimidation to force compliance. I remained calm, collecting each piece of evidence, building my own case. The cameras were in place. The deputies were prepared. My attorney had all documentation in order. The next move was theirs to make. 3 days passed. Then, early Friday morning, my phone buzzed with an alert from the motion sensors at the front gate. Someone had arrived. The black pickup truck returned with purpose, dust billowing behind it as it came to an aggressive stop outside my gate. Through the camera feed on my phone, I watched the same man exit the vehicle. This time he wore a full tactical vest over his polo shirt, a clear escalation meant to intimidate. Most concerning was the baton prominently displayed on his belt, a tool with no legitimate use for code enforcement. I texted Michael, "He is here, armed with baton." Within seconds came the reply, "In position, Rodriguez and Chen ready, let him incriminate himself." Just as before, the man disregarded the no trespassing signs. This time, he actually removed one from the gate, throwing it to the ground before entering my property. I stood on my porch, phone in hand, recording everything. He approached with deliberate steps, clipboard in hand. "Final notice," he shouted from 20 yards away. "You have failed to comply with multiple violation notices. We are preparing enforcement action to remove non-conforming structures." I remained calm, speaking clearly for the recording. "You are trespassing on private property. Please identify yourself and present legal authorization to be here." He pulled out a document from his clipboard and waved it. "This is your removal order. I have full authority to enforce compliance standards on this property." "May I see that document and your identification, please?" I asked, not moving from my position. His face darkened. "You do not get to question my authority. The HOA has jurisdiction here now. This order authorizes the removal of all non-conforming structures, starting with that." He pointed to the barn with his baton. He began walking toward the barn, exactly as we had anticipated. I followed at a distance, continuously recording. "I am formally asking you to leave my property," I stated loudly and clearly. "You are trespassing. You have no legal authority here." "Your time is up," he snapped, slapping the clipboard against his leg. "I am conducting an official inspection. Interference will result in additional penalties." As he rounded the corner of the barn, still ignoring my warnings, the trap sprung. Michael, Rodriguez, and Chen emerged from their positions, official sheriff's department uniforms clearly visible. "Sheriff's Department," Michael announced firmly. "Stop right there and identify yourself." The change in the man's demeanor was instantaneous and dramatic. The false confidence evaporated, replaced by visible panic. He turned as if to run back toward his vehicle. "Stop," Rodriguez commanded. "Put your hands where we can see them." The man froze, then slowly raised his hands, the clipboard falling to the ground. Chen approached him cautiously, securing the baton from his belt before conducting a professional pat-down. "Identify yourself," Michael demanded, his tone leaving no room for evasion. "Robert Mercer," the man said, his voice suddenly smaller. "I work security for Pinecrest Estates." "Do you possess any law enforcement credentials or code enforcement authority?" Michael asked. "I am authorized by the HOA to." "That is not what I asked," Michael interrupted. "Do you possess any official government authority or credentials?" "No," Mercer admitted. "You have presented yourself as a county official, trespassed on private property after being warned not to, carried a weapon during commission of these acts, and made threats. You are being detained pending further investigation." As Chen secured Mercer with handcuffs, the sound of tires on gravel announced a new arrival. The silver Lexus had returned. Karen emerged, her face contorted with indignation as she took in the scene. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, storming toward us. "Release him immediately. We are conducting official HOA business." Sheriff Callahan's vehicle pulled in behind Karen's, perfectly timed. The sheriff stepped out, her presence commanding immediate respect. "Ms. Westfield, I presume," she asked, approaching Karen. "I would advise you to stop right there." Karen appeared momentarily thrown by the sheriff's knowledge of her name, but recovered quickly. "This is outrageous. The association has authority to—" "The association has no authority whatsoever on this property," Sheriff Callahan interrupted. "As I believe you have been informed multiple times, your employee has been impersonating a government official, trespassing and making threats. These are serious crimes." "This is all a misunderstanding," Karen backpedaled, her tone suddenly conciliatory. "Robert is overzealous sometimes." "Overzealous is putting it mildly," the sheriff replied. "We have video evidence of multiple illegal acts conducted at your direction. I suggest you contact your attorney immediately." Karen's face drained of color as she realized the gravity of the situation. Her carefully constructed power play was collapsing around her, exposed under the unforgiving light of actual legal authority. I stood watching from the porch steps, a weight lifting from my shoulders. The threat that had loomed over my property and family was being neutralized before my eyes. Justice had arrived, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with the calm, methodical application of real law. The aftermath unfolded with surprising speed. Robert Mercer, the fake compliance officer, was taken to the sheriff's department for formal questioning. Within hours, his background was revealed. A former mall security guard with a sealed record for intimidation and harassment at previous jobs. He had never held any official government position. More damning was the paper trail connecting him directly to Karen. Bank records showed regular payments from Karen's personal account to Mercer, not from the HOA treasury. Text messages recovered from his phone revealed explicit instructions from Karen targeting specific properties, including mine, with directions to make them uncomfortable enough to comply or leave. By evening, local news had picked up the story. My security footage, which I had shared with the sheriff's department, showed clear evidence of impersonation and trespassing. The reporter, sensing a bigger story, began investigating similar complaints from other communities in the county. Karen Westfield disappeared from public view almost immediately. Her resignation from the HOA board arrived by email the following day, citing personal reasons and health concerns that required her immediate attention. The Pinecrest community buzzed with rumors and revelations as others came forward with their own stories of intimidation. Sam, my neighbor from the development, stopped by 3 days after the incident. "I cannot believe we let this go on so long," he said, genuine remorse in his voice. "We were all so afraid of her connections and power. Now we find out it was all smoke and mirrors." Other neighbors began reaching out, some apologetic, others seeking advice on how to restructure their HOA after Karen's reign. The interim board president, a retired judge named Howard Jensen, contacted me personally. "We would like you to attend our emergency community meeting," he said. "Your experience has exposed serious problems in how our association operates. We need to rebuild with transparency and actual legal boundaries." I agreed to attend, not out of vindictiveness, but because I believed in community harmony. The meeting was held the following Tuesday evening in the Pinecrest Community Center. The room was packed with residents eager to understand what had happened and how to move forward. Judge Jensen opened the meeting with a formal apology to me and anyone else targeted by the previous leadership. "What happened was not just unethical but illegal," he stated plainly. "This association exceeded its authority in inexcusable ways. That ends today." When invited to speak, I kept my comments measured. "I harbor no ill will toward the community," I told them. "Good neighbors respect boundaries, legal and physical. I believe we can coexist peacefully if those boundaries are honored." The new board immediately voted to rescind all violation notices issued to properties outside their legal jurisdiction. They established a committee to review and revise the HOA bylaws to prevent future abuses of power. Sheriff Callahan attended as well, providing an update on the legal proceedings. Mr. Mercer is facing multiple charges including criminal trespassing, impersonation of a government official, and intimidation. Ms. Westfield is under investigation for conspiracy and possible abuse of HOA funds. The community's reaction was a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and relief. Many approached me afterward, sharing their own stories of intimidation under Karen's leadership. The pattern was clear. She had systematically targeted anyone who challenged her vision for the community, using Mercer as her enforcer. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on how quickly the situation had resolved once brought into the light. Karen's power had existed primarily in the shadows, feeding on fear and isolation. Once exposed, it had crumbled almost instantly. My ranch stood peaceful in the fading light as I pulled into the driveway. For the first time in weeks, the sight of my barn and fences brought only satisfaction, not dread of the next confrontation. The threat had been neutralized, but I knew the story was not quite over. Karen's humiliation would not be the end of it. People like her rarely accept defeat gracefully. The certified letter arrived exactly 2 weeks after the confrontation. It came from a law firm I had never heard of, representing Karen Westfield in what they described as a personal injury and defamation action. The claims were as audacious as they were baseless. Harassment, invasion of privacy, emotional distress, and damage to professional reputation. James laughed when I forwarded him the letter. "This is desperation," he said. "She is trying to regain control of the narrative, but she has made a critical error by formalizing these claims." Within days, James filed a comprehensive countersuit, trespassing, conspiracy, false reporting to government agencies, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and malicious prosecution. The documentation was overwhelming. Videos, witness statements, the CPS report, bank records showing payments to Mercer, and text messages directing the harassment campaign. We have been contacted by 3 other property owners with similar experiences, James informed me. They want to join the countersuit. Rather than backing down, I decided to reclaim the narrative completely. I reached out to Sarah Bennett, an investigative journalist with the regional newspaper who specialized in stories about corruption and abuse of power. "This is not just about my property," I explained during our first meeting. "This is about holding accountable those who weaponize organizations meant to serve communities." Sarah conducted thorough research, interviewing dozens of people affected by Karen's tactics. Her 3-part series, titled Neighborhood Tyranny, When HOAs Exceed Their Authority, began with my story but expanded to expose similar patterns across the state. The articles detailed how some associations had evolved from community governance into personal fiefdoms for power-hungry individuals. The impact was immediate and far-reaching. State legislators began discussing regulatory oversight for homeowners associations. Legal aid organizations established hotlines for homeowners facing HOA overreach. My phone rang constantly with interview requests and messages of support. Karen's lawsuit collapsed under the weight of contrary evidence. The judge dismissed her claims with prejudice, calling them frivolous and potentially sanctionable. Our countersuit continued forward, gaining momentum as more victims came forward. Meanwhile, the Pinecrest HOA underwent a complete transformation. The new board, led by Judge Jensen, invited me to consult on their revised bylaws. I worked with them to establish clear jurisdictional boundaries, transparent enforcement procedures, and accountability measures for board members. This document should protect homeowners from the board as much as it protects property values, I insisted. The final version included term limits for board members, independent review of violation notices, and explicit recognition of property rights. My story caught the attention of the State Rural Landowners Association, which invited me to speak at their annual conference. Standing before hundreds of property owners, I shared not just what had happened but the lessons learned. Document everything, I advised them. Know your legal rights. Build alliances with neighbors and local officials, and most importantly, never assume that someone claiming authority actually possesses it. The speech resonated deeply, especially with rural property owners increasingly facing pressure from expanding developments. I found myself becoming an unexpected advocate for property rights and responsible community governance. Karen's reputation in the community was irreparably damaged. Her real estate business suffered as former clients distanced themselves. Her home in Pinecrest, once a showpiece of the community, appeared on the market with a drastically reduced banner across the listing. Mercer faced his own consequences. With his history exposed and new charges filed, he accepted a plea deal that included probation, community service, and a prohibition from working in any security or enforcement capacity. Through it all, I maintained a dignified approach, focusing on systemic reform rather than personal vengeance. My goal was not to destroy Karen, but to ensure that her tactics could never be employed again, by her or anyone else. The most satisfying development came when the County Commission unanimously passed the Property Rights Protection Act, informally known among staff as the Karen Law. It established clear limits on HOA jurisdiction, created an oversight board for association activities, and established penalties for false claims of governmental authority. As autumn arrived, I began work on a project I had delayed for years, a new entrance to my ranch. The old gate was replaced with a custom iron design featuring the ranch's name. Beside it stood a hand-carved wooden sign that read, "Private property, lawfully protected." The message was not meant as a threat but as a reminder, to myself as much as to others, that rights undefended can be rights lost. The battle had been difficult but necessary, and in winning it, I had helped secure protections not just for my land but for others who might have faced similar intimidation without the resources to fight back. 1 year after Karen's first violation notice arrived in my mailbox, my ranch stood transformed, not in the way she had intended, but in ways far more meaningful. The physical changes were subtle but significant. A sophisticated security system with motion-activated cameras monitoring the perimeter, solar-powered lighting illuminating the property line at night, and a new custom-carved wooden sign at the entrance that simply stated, "Do not tread beneath the ranch name." But the most profound transformations were invisible to casual observers. The atmosphere of anxiety that had pervaded the property during Karen's campaign had dissipated completely. My niece Emma, initially shaken by the CPS investigation, had regained her confidence and joy. Her art studio in the converted shed near the barn was filled with new paintings, landscapes of the ranch that captured its peace and permanence. My daughter had returned for summer break from veterinary school, spending peaceful days working with the rescue horses. "This place feels different now," she observed one evening as we sat on the porch. "Stronger somehow." She was right. There was a renewed certainty to our presence on this land. The boundaries, legal and physical, had been tested and had held firm. What Karen had intended as an assault on our way of life had instead reinforced it. The legal proceedings had concluded 3 months earlier with a settlement that included financial compensation, and more importantly, legally binding restrictions preventing Karen or any agent acting on her behalf from approaching my property or contacting my family. The financial aspects would help fund Emma's college education, a fitting use for money that came from standing our ground. Karen had indeed disappeared from public life. Her house sold at a significant loss, and rumors placed her in another state, starting over. I felt no pleasure in her downfall, only relief that the threat she represented had been neutralized. Sheriff Callahan's department maintained a cordial relationship with the ranch. Deputies would occasionally stop by, not as enforcers but as neighbors checking in. Michael had been promoted to lieutenant, partly due to his handling of the case. "You taught us something important," he told me during one visit. "How easily authority can be mimicked, and how dangerous that can be. We have implemented new verification protocols because of what happened here." The Pinecrest HOA, under Judge Jensen's leadership, had become a model for reform. Their revised policies were being studied by associations across the state. They focused now on community building rather than restriction enforcement, hosting events that brought neighbors together instead of driving them apart. On quiet evenings, I often walked the perimeter of my property, a ritual that had once been about vigilance but had evolved into appreciation. The fence line that Karen had demanded I remove now represented something more profound than a boundary. It was a visible reminder of principles upheld. Near the eastern pasture, I installed a small bench overlooking the valley. It was there, watching the sunset paint the landscape in gold and amber, that I often reflected on how close we had come to losing something precious. Not just the physical property, but the peace of mind that comes from security in one's home. The journalist Sarah Bennett had coined a phrase in her final article that resonated deeply with me: True property rights exist not just on paper, but in their active defense. I had those words engraved on a small plaque attached to the bench. This land had been in my family for generations, each caretaker adding something to its story. My chapter would now include this struggle and triumph. Future generations would know that when challenged, we had stood firm. The documentation of our fight was preserved not just in legal records but in the family archives, lessons for those who would inherit this land after me. As darkness fell on another peaceful day, I sat on my porch looking out at the barn that still stood proud against the evening sky. The lights inside glowed warmly as Emma tended to a new rescue horse, her movements gentle and assured. My daughter's RV remained parked exactly where it had always been, a welcome sight rather than the eyesore Corinne had labeled it. The land answered to no one now but those who loved and tended it. The peace we enjoyed was not given, it was earned through vigilance and resolve. There would perhaps be other challenges in the future, other attempts to encroach upon what was ours. But the precedent had been set, the boundaries established. This land was ours, these rules were ours, and that truth, hard won and precious, was worth every moment of the fight.